Well, hello, and thank you so much for joining me on another Nightscape Images adventure. And today I want to relive an adventure I had about 2 weeks ago. Now the story goes like this. I have a friend who lives in this district. It's about an hour and a half's drive from where I live, and he suggested to me that there's quite a few objects and locations around here that I might enjoy shooting nightscapes at. So I decided, yeah, let's do that. So we got together one night and I made the journey up to here, and I'm going to show you around some of those locations now. Well, what amazing subject matter these are, this old loader and the old truck there. Now, believe it or not, these are actually garden ornaments from the owners who live here. And they're very kindly allowed, firstly Ian and then myself, to come here to shoot this at night under the stars. So Ian is good friends with the owners of the property, so thank you very much for letting me come back here again today. They're just fantastic. Now, of course, one of the things we're always looking for when scouting out locations to shoot the nightscape is what direction does this face? I mean, is there clear sky behind the subject to get the Milky Way? Well, in this case, it's perfect. We have the Milky Way core rising up in the southeastern sky at dusk. So when I first came here with Ian, it was just after sunset and we had a fair bit of cloud cover to contend with. Thankfully, as the night progressed, it cleared over the top of this location and we were able to get a number of shots of the clear sky with the Milky Way core fairly high above the subject matter here. But still, I use the Nikon Z6 with the 20mm f1.8 lens, and you already know that's my favourite lens to shoot nightscapes with. And the sky cleared enough for me to get, I think, 6 shots, which I was able to stack for noise reduction, and that worked really well. Then I took a number of foreground images around the truck and the loader with the intention of light painting and blending in later on. And I was absolutely rapt with how that shot came out. Okay, well, you're probably thinking, well, that was a pretty good find. I mean, there's nothing like that around where I live. Well, I'll tell you what, we haven't finished yet, because just over there, there's another absolutely awesome subject matter for a nightscape. Let's go and have a look. Fantastic, have a look at this. Now, you know, the old truck and loader over there was just absolutely fantastic. But this takes the cake. For me, this was the subject that I most wanted to shoot under the night sky. Now, initially, it looks like it's a very, very difficult subject to shoot. Why? Because it's covered by this pine tree. So when we were here, we had to decide how are we going to angle this up. Now, by the time we got to shoot this, the Milky Way core was really high behind the tree. So you couldn't actually see the Milky Way. For years and years, I wouldn't shoot things like this because I thought, I can't see the Milky Way, so what's the point? Well, you know what? There is a great point, because this subject matter is just as important as the Milky Way. So what did I do? Well, I decided there's enough sky underneath the tree to put it into context and to make it look like, yeah, it's a nightscape. And not only that, the tree itself looks fantastic with a bit of light painting. So let me show you exactly how I did this. Alright, so the process of actually taking the photo went something like this. Firstly, I took 4 shots of the background sky with the intention of stacking for noise reduction. So I used my Z6 with a 20mm f1.8 again, f2.8 aperture, 15-second shutter speed, and ISO 6400 for the sky. Now, a lot of you ask me, why do you shoot at such a high ISO? Well, especially when I'm going to be stacking for noise reduction, that's the whole point. I want to keep the shutter speed as low as I can. Sometimes I'll shoot at 10-second shutter speeds to get sharper stars. In this case, I didn't because, well, there wasn't that many stars in the background at all, but I still wanted to clean up that image. And even 4 images will clean up a lot better than just having a single image. So that was great. Now, from there, I stopped down my aperture to f5.6 and my shutter speed remained at 15 seconds, but I also dropped my ISO to 500. And the reason I do that, I've said this many times before, I want to clean up and make that image as sharp and as noise-free as I possibly can. So if we close down the aperture, lower the ISO, that's the end result. So then, I got up close to the car. Sometimes I shot as close as this, just to light up bits and pieces of the car behind this tree, and I hid behind there. But it doesn't matter because I shot about 13 exposures to get all the way around the car. So I got over the other side of the car, I was at the front here, behind the tree, and I think it looks great. Now, I also lit the tree with the torch. I was just using my small LED Lenser torch to do all of the light painting. And remember, between all of these shots, including the background sky, you cannot move the tripod position at all. Have to make sure that is fixed and stays fixed. And I was absolutely wrapped in this shot. Well, there you have it. Now, Ian and I spent a considerable amount of time here, probably at least a couple of hours, shooting both of these subjects. And that's one of the things, you have to make sure you give yourself plenty of time, because when you're shooting in the field with the concept of blending and layering and stacking, it does take a lot longer than just taking single shots. But I think you'll agree the results are certainly well worth it. Now, we didn't finish the night there. Ian showed me a few locations, and there's another one I'm going to take you to now, which I think you'll really enjoy. Simple, but a great image. So, let's go and have a look. Wow, what an absolutely fantastic subject matter for a nightscape image. Now, this old Bowser is sitting out here in the open on this farm property, way off the beaten track. And if it hadn't been for Ian, I would have had no idea that this was even here. So he suggested we come and shoot it, and I want to go through some of the details of how we got this shot. Now, because this is a high and quite a narrow, skinny subject matter, we decided to shoot this in portrait orientation. So upon looking at the background and everything else, I decided that I'd get the camera down fairly low, but not extremely low to the ground, because I wanted to get a little bit of separation with that background, but I still wanted to use the background. At the time when we shot this, there was a fair bit of cloud coming across, and I thought to myself, well, I might just use a single frame for the background. One thing I've worked out over the years is when you try to stack background images that have too much cloud cover in them, it's really hard for the software to do that, and you end up getting artifacts and not really alleviating too much noise. So I decided just to use one single background shot for the clouds. And I had a bit of glow from Melbourne, which, as I said, is about 60 k's away, lighting up the clouds, and I didn't mind that. Then I put my attention to lighting up the foreground. So one of the key features when lighting up some of these old rusty subject matter like this is to try and retain some of the detail in this old hardware. For example, this hose and this nozzle on the end here, and especially the glass panel at the top. We went through a few different scenarios to try and light that, but in the end we just put a light behind to shine up to backlight as if there was a bit of a light happening inside, and I think that worked pretty well. But yeah, it was a matter of trying to get the detail without flaring, because there's a fair bit of white on this, and it was really important not to over brighten the subject. As I mentioned before, I did one shot for the background. I shot that at f2.8, 15 seconds at ISO 4000. Then I took 10 shots to light the foreground at aperture 5.6, ISO of 500, and again 15-second shutter speed. And all we did was my typical fine art light painting method, where I walked around, lit every angle so that we could see all the fine detail and yet not over brightened from any one direction. Now, there was a fair bit of wind blowing. As you can see, it's the same right now, so it must be a pretty windy spot here. So because it was so windy, and as you can see, everything around here is blowing around like anything, I decided to use the torch and the typical light painting method. One of the things that I will do to alleviate the movement is to try and make the torch beam a bit stronger and have it shining for less time. And especially when you're backlighting these areas like this, it helps to alleviate that movement just that little bit. And I'm pretty happy with the result I got with that. I was really careful to light the foreground here around the base of the unit, especially there's a few bricks and things around the background, a few bolts and detail down the bottom, because for me that sort of detail is what makes the shot, and I'm really happy with how this one came out. So by the time we'd finished shooting this old Bowser here, it was getting pretty late, and it was probably close enough to midnight. So we decided to call it quits. The clouds had rolled in and there wasn't much else that we could actually shoot in this district. So it was looking like being a pretty ordinary night from here onwards. So I made my way home, and I strike kangaroos everywhere I go. So for those of you who are not living in Australia, you don't know what I'm talking about. I'll tell you what, kangaroos are rampant around the country Victorian landscape where I live. And so I decided to go home a different way to the way I came, to try and find a little bit better roads and therefore less kangaroo trouble. Okay, well, here we are at a little town called Karlsruhe, which is probably about 10 kilometres from Kyneton. That's the biggest town around here. Now, as you can see behind me, there's a freeway, and I was coming towards that freeway because I was trying to avoid, as I said earlier, the kangaroos. Now it's funny because I've just come across from where I was, which is about 35 kilometres from here, and I passed about 10 dead kangaroos on the side of the road. So you see what I'm saying? Over that side of the world, there's a lot of kangaroos. So I decided I'd come over to the freeway. Now, what happened when I got here to this location, I got out of the car just to have a look around, and the sky was as clear as crystal. So what do you do in the middle of the night when you're on your way home and the sky is clear as crystal? What I did was jump back in the car and immediately go to my GPS and work out what locations for nightscapes I'd already scouted out around this location, and I found quite a few. Okay, well, I've just pulled up at my first location. Now, as you can see, there's quite a few cars here, so this is a pretty popular spot to visit during the daytime. Where am I at? This is Turpin's Falls. So I came along here in the middle of the night. Now, it's a pretty dangerous place to be if you're not careful. Lots of rocks, big walk downhill to where the falls are visible. Just down there behind me, you can see this is the classic view of the falls from above. And but for a nightscape image, that's not going to work for me. So I've got to continue on down this track and get down to the bottom so that I can look up at the falls from down there and get some of the sky in the background. So I got down here quite close to the edge of the water. And as you can see behind me, the water comes right up to these rocks. The difficult part was getting the tripod steady because I had to put the legs right down into the water. So what I did was a 10-shot, 2-row horizontal panorama so I get the width and then the width up again. As it turns out, I still got plenty of sky behind the falls there, and I was pretty happy with that. I was shooting this at f2.8, ISO 6400 with 15-second shutter speed. So I actually spent quite a bit of time here, probably a couple of hours at least, and I really only came away with one composition because it was really hard to get down there. But you know, I really enjoyed being here all by myself in the dead of night, and I loved the rocks and the river running down there. The other thing about it is just the solitude. Being here under the stars just made it so much more enjoyable. Being able to see the Southern Cross and the Magellanic Clouds there above the waterfall was just great. But from here, I had another composition in mind, just back down the road up there. So I'll go and show you that one now. 100%. All right, well here we are at our next location, which is just down the road from where I came from. You're probably wondering, well, what's out here? Well, just have a look behind me and you'll see an old dead tree and a water tank. That's our next location. So I decided, because the Milky Way was getting lower down in the sky, it creates that bow across in the southwestern sky, that I was going to shoot this as a panorama. So I decided to shoot 20 shots divided into 3 rows. 1, 2, 3, to get more of the sky. I shot at ISO 6400, 15-second shutter speed at f2.8, and I used my Nikon Z6 with a 20mm f1.8. So I've been using that camera and lens for everything I've shot so far on this night journey, and I reckon it came up pretty well. Okay, so I'm just driving down the road here, heading to my next destination, and I'm actually waiting for the GPS to tell me when I've arrived. Now,
in 200 meters, arrive at Lone Tree on Hill Metcalf on the right.
Well, there you go. It's just told me I've arrived. Now, in the daytime, I can actually see that I've arrived at my location, but when I came up here during the night time, I could not see a thing. So that's the advantage of having that GPS. All right, well, I'm not going to spend too much time here because 1, I'm on the road, 2, it's just about to rain. But anyway, there's a tree in that paddock just over the other side of this fence here. And so that tree is facing in exactly the right way for me to get a panorama of the Milky Way core in the western sky. So I shot 9 shots at 15-second shutter speed, f2.8 and ISO 6400. And that one came up quite nicely indeed. Now, at the moment, I'm probably about 25 minutes from home, and I've got 3 shots that I want to show you here that I took the night on the way home. So you can see why I didn't get home till 5:30 a.m. in the morning, because I had a lot of stop-offs to make on the way home. Let's head up here and I'll show you what I shot that night. So far it hasn't rained, but just in case it does, I've got my shower cap in my pocket here ready to put on top of the camera. I'll get wet, but the camera won't. All right, now this is the reason I came all the way up here, the tree in the background here. For this I thought I'd use my Sigma 35mm f1.4 lens on the Z6, just because I wanted to draw that Milky Way core in a little bit closer. Now, this is facing west, and the Milky Way core was coming down behind the level of that tree, about 3/4 of the way up, and I decided I'd shoot a vertical orientation panorama. So that's what I did, just very minimal light painting and just stitched in Lightroom, and the results of that are right here. All right, so here we are at another one. Well, you know how much I love old gates, and old fence posts. So this location just happens to have both of those items. So I decided to shoot back towards the west here, pretty much where the camera is facing down there at the moment. Firstly, I shot 8 sky images focused on infinity, shooting at f2.8, ISO 6400, 10-second shutter speed, and with the intention of stacking them in sequator to use as my background. All of the foreground was just left dark. Then I refocused onto the foreground here and closed down my aperture to f6.3. Now you're probably asking, why would I go to f6.3? Well, the reason is because I had that 35mm Sigma Art series, and this gate, there's a lot of difference between the focal point here and the focal point even back where that fence is. So I wanted to increase my depth of field, and by closing down the aperture, that has the benefit of increasing the depth of field. I shot that at ISO 500, 10-second shutter speed, and I took 13 foreground shots. So I light painted all around the edges of the fence post, the gate, the tufts of grass, the ground, everything. Then I blended the whole lot together in Lightroom and Photoshop. Remember, I did the sky in sequator, so that turned out really, really well. All right, well, you've stuck with me this long. This has been quite a marathon so far. And believe me, when you're doing this in the middle of the night, all night, it's more than a marathon, I'll tell you. I've got one more composition here, just down there, before we hit the road and finish this video. So I'll show you that one now. And so here we come to our final composition from the evening. Have a look at these 3 trees. They're twisted and they're gnarling, and they're not very pretty, to be honest, but you know, that's the attraction. I love the shapes and just the way that they sort of contrast with the sky behind. And what happened was, I left that Sigma 35mm Art Series lens on, and I shot a stack of 4 or 5 images here to just stack. I wasn't doing any panoramas or anything special with focal plane foregrounds or anything. I just left the focus on infinity, got the camera far enough back to get the whole thing in a shot, and then I stacked those in sequator. I shot them at f2.8, 10-second shutter speed at ISO 6400. So the settings that I've used today for all of my shots haven't been very much different. When I used a 20mm lens, I shot at 15-second shutter speed. When I used a 35mm lens, I was shooting at 10-second shutter speed. That's only because of the movement of the stars is greatly exaggerated the longer the focal length. Even though one's an f1.8, one's an f1.4, I stopped them both down to f2.8, and I do that because it sharpens up the image. And this one came out really well as well. Okay, well, we've come to the end of our adventure, finally. Now you can only imagine how long this all took shooting in the evening, because I had to carry all the gear around and I had to set the camera up and do all of the other things. So you can imagine it was quite a lot more involved than what I've had to go through today. And that was long enough. So that's why I didn't get home till 5:30 in the morning. But I loved every minute of it. I love being out under the stars. I love exploring these locations and all the different things that you see along the way. So happy to answer any questions you might have, any comments, any suggestions. Just put them down below and I'll be really keen to see what you guys have got to say about my journey. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, then I would really value that if you did. If you do, just press the little bell icon down the bottom, and then you'll be notified whenever I bring out some new content. So speaking of new content, I've got a few things up my sleeve and I'm looking forward to bringing those for you guys in due course. So I'll see you guys later.